I do have a question before we start. Why did you pick this book?
Why did I pick this one? It was because I remember our last conversation, we had briefly touched on Clancy. You mentioned being like kind of a fan. I think you touched on his style, right? And kind of comparing your style to his and I remember thinking, I was like, when Debbie reached out to me, I was like, I wonder if James would be interested in doing a Clancy. So, because we haven't touched on Clancy yet, this whole podcast. And I mean, there's thousands of writers we haven't touched on, of course, but like then we plan to eventually. But yeah, when you did that, and I was just like, I wonder if James would be interested in that. And I was thinking, well, what book should we do? Clancy's so prolific; he's got so many books. And I was like, should we do the first Jack Ryan? Like his big, character. Should we? And then I was thinking of this one. I was like, I wonder if we should do the first John Clark one. It's one that isn't talked about as much as the one. Although I know it's a movie now. But it wasn't turned into a movie for 30 years after 30 years after it came out. So I don't know. I was like, this one would be a little bit not as done before, I guess, as what I was going.
There's a reason for my question, but I'm gonna hold back on that until we get into this.
Yeah.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No!
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
Yeah, but thanks again for coming on, James. It's great to have you back.
Yeah,
and this is another episode of Heavy Bored. And we are back with James Gregory. James Gregory, how have you been?
just wonderful. Thanks.
Fantastic. And for listeners out there, James has a brand new book out here. He's incredibly prolific. It's been only months since his previous book, but his new book out, Killer App. James, tell me a little bit about this new book.
Well, this is a fascinating issue regarding something that concerns everyone. How is this artificial intelligence going to impact us? And everyone, a lot of people are very nervous about it, especially if they don't really know how it works. It's just frankly, it's just a tool like any other, new tool. You got to learn how to use it and how to work with it. But what's particularly interesting about this is there are a lot of concerns about things like privacy and job displacement and biases and accountability and deception and all these things relating to artificial intelligence. And so I decided to write a novel about it and play on everyone's fears about all these things, and have all of those issues come up in the novel. Now, to really understand how artificial intelligence works, I took a 6-week course at MIT on how did it originate, what was it really all about? How does it work? And should we really be concerned about these issues, that come up? And what I found is the issues are well founded. The concerns are well founded. We're playing by the seat of our pants on this. We don't have any rules that are written. And the fact is that every time there's new technology that comes out, so somebody abuses it, and going and well. And so I think that there's a lot of concern around how this is going to shake out. So anyway, Killer App is really focused on this one guy whose name is Bryce Bogle, and he's a journalist, just a just a run-of-the-mill journalist working for his family's media company. A small, they own some newspapers and that sort of thing, and magazines. And his mother is on the board of, she's one of the founders, and his father is involved in the company. And so this subplot is that they are encouraging Bryce to get this app, this app that helps him write better and think better and do more wonderful things with this artificial intelligence, and it works. This journalist really becomes much more in demand. He's doing well. He's cranking out articles left and right, really breaking through new territory, and it's all this artificial intelligence working. And it has a name, by the way. It's Amy, which stands for Artificial Intelligence Made Easy. And Amy is really embraces Bryce and all of his needs and all of that. But she begins to probe into his personal life and begins to check into, what's he really all about? What does he really do? How does he really fit with the family? And he said, well, you can't get into my personal life. And she says, why not? It's like Dave in 2001.
Yeah.
Thought, why not?
I can't do that.
Yeah. And so she begins to resist him. Now, this is kind of part of the whole big picture of what artificial intelligence is all about. I mean, back in the 1950s, there was a guy, there was something called the Dartmouth Conference or the Dartmouth Workshop. And a professor by the name of Marvin Minsky said machines can imitate any intelligence if given enough data and direction. So that has been the motivating factor behind artificial intelligence. And that's why this natural language process has been around for a long time. They want robots to look like human beings. They're the more popular ones, the ones that can actually have hands and eyes and all of that. But communicating with people is becoming better and better and better. So I've got to be careful not to say it too loud, but Siri and Alexa are products of that. They are they're getting us used to working with artificial intelligence, and they just came out with a whole new batch, a whole new level, much more sophisticated. You don't have to keep repeating yourself and clarifying issues. They really are understanding on a level that is much more sophisticated than it used to be, and much more comfortable, much more personal. You can just talk to them and get the things you want. So so that's kind of where kind of the start or the premise for the book. And then where it goes from there is it gets pretty wild. She makes a mistake. She causes huge problems. And one of my favorite parts of the book is when they finally say, "Hey, look, we've got to uninstall you." She said, "No, I don't think so."
Right. Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, David and all that. I was going to ask, like what inspired this, because it is. It's something in fiction. It's especially in science fiction and all of that. But now it's not, now it's real world, right? Like there was always this, the 2001: A Space Odyssey. Oh, we have these robots. I'm thinking of like even like Terminator, like these kind of big pop culture things where the artificial intelligence eventually determines that in order to help humans, they need to destroy them, right? Because like, the Skynet thing, right? We're violent and primitive and whatever, and the computer is rational and they know what's best. And I think even more recently, like, and this was, I say recently, but it was like, 15 years ago now, like, the movie Her, where the guy falls in love with his AI assistant and, that's all becoming, everyone scoffed at that a few years ago, but it's all becoming quite real now.
Who wouldn't fall in love with Scarlett Johansson? I mean,
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
I mean, they picked a great voice. But her was very much addressing this issue. Another one is Ex Machina.
Yes, very good
Oh
one.
my
Yeah.
God, you freak out.
Yes.
It's a freak out kind of movie, and 2001: A Space Odyssey. If people haven't seen that lately, just do yourself a favor, get a bag of popcorn and watch it, because man, that is where we are going. It is too funny. Great stuff.
Yeah, and I want to talk to you about that too, in terms of the themes of seduction, because I think like the seduction, like that's what everybody's scared about, like the seduction and stuff like that from the AI. Oh, it's making it too easy for us. Now we don't have to think. I taught college for many years. That's becoming a big concern in terms of people not turning in original work. They're turning in AI created work. For my day job now, I train AI models. Not so much, I'm not on the coding side of things, but I am on the kind of the language arts side of things, and the large language models that are because I think that's something too, like people confuse it. There's different types of AI, right? Like there's the large language models is the most common one that everyone's using right now in the last few years, ChatGPT. And it's interesting that ChatGPT or whatever was trying to use Scarlett Johansson's voice for their model, right? Based on that movie. And there was a lawsuit. We're seeing lawsuits with these large language models from writers because they're just scraping the internet, and whatever's on the internet they can just use. It's very and I think it's only going to keep blowing up more. Like it's only going to keep snowballing in terms of, like you said in the very beginning of this, the rules. What are the rules for this new technology? How are we going to let it affect our lives? What are we going to let it do for us? Right now it's basically, you said Siri, Alexa. These are basically like assistants. So they'll help you schedule an appointment, send an email or something, like little virtual assistants. But then when you think about like kind of the robotics side of it, where you see these tech companies now they've been doing this for decades, trying to get like a robot that can be sentient, like that Ex Machina plot, which I second that recommendation. Listeners, if you haven't seen it, Alex Garland's Ex Machina, fantastic very small kind of scale, but very, very impactment. Only a couple characters.
Brilliant. It's a brilliant movie, and it's just a classic. But it's only becoming known now, because it was so far out there in 10 years ago. Interesting. Well, one of the things is there are technological and ethical dilemmas that are going to be worked out, and they're hammered out for the next 10 or 15 years, I think, on this every single day. The Wall Street Journal just last week had an article. It's called Evals, EVALS, and it's about artificial intelligence developers are racing to develop tools that surpass human abilities and can work autonomously on behalf of users. But how can we make sure these models won't do harm?
Right.
And so these evals are being done. That's a battery of automated tests that confirm or that aim to figure out how capable the latest AI models are. It's like the Turing test from long ago.
Right.
Testing to see if they're how close it is to human-like interaction. Well, we are beyond that. We've taken the next step, and it's really wild, Wild West. But I also wanted to mention, you were concerned about professors who are, wondering, are their students really doing their own work or not? Well, when I got my doctorate, when you graduate, you join a team we get together every Wednesday night evening, and it's all on Zoom, and all the professors and all the students and all the alums, whoever wants to join the conversation can join in. It's fascinating. Every night it's the same subject, and it's this issue. Now here's the real kicker. What I find interesting is that the professors are using AI more than the students. The professors are finding ways to make it easier on themselves to evaluate papers, to be able to ask questions, to do quantitative research, to do quantitative surveys, and to build tests and analyze the answers. They're the ones that are doing it. They're the ones that are taking it to the next level. And so I think it's not going to be a major problem. We're going to figure this out on the academic side pretty readily, I believe. And you can identify, we're getting used to, I can spot an article that's been written by AI. I can spot those key words that come up in artificial intelligence assisted kind of papers, and that's okay. I don't mind them. I recognize them, but I'm not so concerned.
Right. Yeah,
We'll
it's
see.
interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think, especially because it's so popular right now, because it's like this big thing that everybody's kind of looming over all of society and culture and stuff, like, oh, this new tech. There's people that are overhyping. Of course, there's people like, I know you see, of course, the CEOs of these companies are obviously, that's their job, is to talk up their product and all that. But I saw a few quotes by a few researchers that were just saying stuff like, oh, we're going to end disease in 10 years, or we're going to, just these really lofty things that I'm just like, I don't know, man. I mean, Siri can barely, like you said, can barely understand me when I'm talking to her in an accent or something, like, I don't know if we're going to cure disease in 10 years, maybe 50 years, maybe that seems more realistic with an AI model. But, so there's that. And then I think, and I guess because it is so new too, I see, I'm interested. I'm going to ask you about this because it's what I see with it. I see a lot of people talking about it in terms of art too, in terms of what it's going to do for artists, writers, filmmakers. These types of mediums that have never had this type of technology really come into it yet. And as I said, I kind of work in this field, training things, and the kind of obsession with getting it to do these kind of video formats and things like that, like that's companies are pushing that right now. Like, can it do, based on a prompt, instructions, produce, a high quality video that you could, even compare to, big budget cinema or something that, like, oh, it looks great, it sounds great, and it can't really do that yet either, at least for long periods of time. It's like a couple, maybe give you like 30 seconds of like high quality video or something. It's and then you have the hallucination issues too. But I was going to ask you about this kind of, where do you think the role for AI or something, or this technology like AI in art creation for artists, kind of that ethical dilemma, and I think as a tool as well, right? Like, I guess my question is, are we focusing on the wrong things just yet? Like, are we focusing on, trying to make it be a filmmaker, trying to make AI make films or write books or novels? Is that the best use of it? Should we be focusing on something else, like more of perfect the assistant level software like Siri and Alexa and stuff like that before we move on to making videos and novels and paintings, right? I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the creative world is approaching it from an all of the above answer. Everything's being worked on simultaneously, and some are good, some are bad, some are not going to meet any level of criteria that would be important for success. Others will just take off like a rocket, and we'll adapt to it and be using it in a year. My background, what got me into the communications field was that I was an artist. Graphic designer. That's what I was trained to do. And when I started my career, I mean, this shows my age, but we used T-squares and magic markers to prepare our presentations, and you were judged. The quality of your work was judged by how well you could comp with magic marker a headline, and would the headline fit the space you had, and as you scratched out a magic marker, and that, I mean, we've come a long way. I have a T-square on my wall just as a piece of art, but when I, within a couple of years after I graduated from college, everything I learned within 5 years, everything I learned in college for all the skills that I was trained to do in graphic design were all gone. They were 100% gone. And the things like being able to spec typography, you had to count the number of letters and how many, the type size and type font, and, make it fit onto a page. That was real talent. That was skill that you were trained to do. And you had to do it. I mean, it was just, you had to learn that system. And then it changed. And it used to be, hot, they call it hot type because it was molten lead was put into these trays. And I knew how to do that, and all of a sudden they started saying, no, it's from now on, it's going to be cold type. Well, cold type was produced by a computer. So it wasn't hot, it was cold. And it came out as a sheet of typography that you could adjust simply by adjusting the margins or adjusting the type height. And if it wasn't right, you could just simply run it again, at the right height, the right size. And that process of going through this entire cycle, this 360-degree change of everything you were trained to do was very sobering. I was like, at that point, I started my business when I was 23. By the time I was 25, it was obsolete. And I was struggling to try to figure out what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. And my wife was my partner. Evelyn and I started the business together, and we decided to invest in a computer that would do this cold type stuff. And it was a great investment. It was but I didn't know how to use it. I had to hire people, specialists. And suddenly this wall, this giant wall that was in front of us, we made a tunnel through the wall and got onto the other side. And suddenly our business took off, and we were advancing in this area of cold typography, and we promoted ourselves like crazy. Hot type is old. That this stuff is really great, and we're much more efficient, and et cetera. So all the marketing activities, but it just amazing that was one 360-degree cycle. Over a 40-year period of running our business, we have the speed of the cycles, the 360-degree cycles, is getting faster and faster and faster, to the point where, in 2013, I just simply said, I've got to get off this cycle. It may kill me to jump off here, but I cannot keep up. So it's just like a pitcher loses his fastball. You suddenly realize, hey, I can't maintain this ability to change as fast as I used to. Now, the other interesting thing, so I get sell my business, I jump off, and I start a new business of writing books. And it's a whole new world,
Right.
and it's just as hard, and it's just as confusing, and podcast, for God's sake, until 8 or 9 months ago, I think you were one of my first podcasts that I
Oh,
did,
yes.
and I was nervous as hell, and and now I'm an old hand at it. It's just really funny. You gotta embrace change, or you're gonna get rolled right over it.
Yeah.
It's gonna kill you.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that too, like listeners, if you want to hear more about James's long, illustrious, successful career in marketing and advertising, we do cover that on when he first came on the podcast, only a few short months ago. I think it was like episode 64, 65. Right around, you'll see it, listeners, but that we go into more detail about this, and it's always fantastic and stuff. But yeah, that's fantastic to hear too, with this kind of the way it's changing so quickly, especially publishing. And I think, even the people running these big industries in publishing, they're in the same position where they're treading water to keep up, just to keep their head afloat with everything changing. AI kind of yanking the business model, the internet, even before AI, yanking the business model out from under, little rug pull out from underneath their feet. And then they're just kind of struggling. And then, this kind of copyright. So if all these companies own the copyrights to these books, and AI is scraping them for free because of an ebook that was online somewhere in a PDF or something, and it could just access it for free, what are they going to do? How are they going to respond? Is that industry, I mean this in terms of like kind of a legal and business sense, are they too weak and too small compared to these tech giants to even make a dent in some, when they're trying to sue for copyright infringement and stuff, if these tech companies can just drag that out for decades if they want, and it does, pennies to them. But these publishing companies, it would be their entire revenue. It would be a fortune to drag this out. And then you have to think, is it worth it? Yeah. I mean, these are some of the ethical questions I think that your book raises. And I think when you talk about artificial intelligence and robots, I was thinking, my dad's a big Asimov fan, and I was like, oh man, I was thinking we should have done some Isaac Asimov or something. I grew up on a lot of those books, but that's for the next episode, James. That's the next episode.
Okay.
We'll do that.
That's a deal.
Yeah. When you do your next book, because James is so prolific here, coming out with a book every couple months. Yeah. All right. So let's. That's fantastic, and we're going to keep talking about the killer app, James's latest book. I wanted to talk a little bit about, because when we came here today, listeners, we're going to talk about Tom Clancy's Without Remorse. This is the first John Clarke novel. A lot of people know Clancy. They know him for the Jack Ryan stuff, and that's like the most famous stuff. But we were talking about the first John Clarke novel. And just the little details for everybody, all these book nerds out there. The book was published originally in 1993. It's the first John Clarke novel published by Berkeley. Imprint of Penguin Random House. And most people know who Tom Clancy is. Tom Clancy is this huge figure. For me growing up in my millennial generation, and I know probably your children, James, were the video games were my big first introduction to Tom Clancy. Rainbow Six, SEAL Team, all these kinds of video games that were based on his novel series that I thought were really just pivotal moments in my childhood and my generation's childhood, at least. So a lot of us were introduced to Clancy through that. And then, you get into reading, you start getting into Tom Clancy. But I wanted to ask, and this is what I like to ask when everybody comes on for this, what's your history with this book and Clancy in general? What's your history? What's your background with it?
Okay, well, the first Tom Clancy book that I read, it just changed my world, and it's not too strong a statement to say he inspired me. Two people inspired me to become a writer. One is Tom Clancy, and the other was David McCullough. David McCullough writes the old history books and that sort of things, and I just loved his book about Johnstown, the Johnstown flood. But Tom Clancy, when I read the first book, and he would take 5 pages to describe the trigger mechanism of a pistol and why it's superior and how it worked and how it saved this guy's life because of the way he used it. I said that is the coolest thing in the world, the way he writes. And I just loved it. Just absolutely loved it. The Hunt for Red October, Red Storm Rising, Patriot Games, The Cardinal of the Kremlin, Clear and Present Danger, The Sum of All Fears, Without Remorse, Debt of Honor. I mean, Executive Orders, all these were absolute classics. Every time he would produce a book, I could hardly wait to get my hands on it, to start reading it. But of all these wonderful classics, I think the weakest one of the bunch is Without Remorse. And I think he did this book as a transitional positioning book to introduce John Clark and to in order to position him as this incredible bad guy, not a bad good guy,
right?
A good bad, and he needed that bigger than life figure, and he introduced him through this book, and so that's my thinking on it. I felt that when we first talked about it, but I had to reread the book to kind of reconfirm my thinking about it, and I believe that book did. It was written at a time when there was a lot of anger. We're coming off the Vietnam War. There was tension between the younger people, which I was at that time, and the older people who loved war and loved reading about war, and they loved these books. And the young people hated war and loved the books, and so there was a very interesting dynamic. And suddenly there were movies and other books coming out that were a lot about revenge and vigilantism and that sort of thing. Like Death Wish, Rambo, Taken, Dirty Harry. And there was one, I Spit on Your Grave.
Yeah. That's a classic now.
And I think that was kind of a transitional thing that he was trying to make a bad guy. I don't think Tom Clancy had an instinct to be a bad guy. I think the bad guy parts of this book, Without Remorse, are clunky. I don't think it's nearly as smooth or as enjoyable as his other work. That being said, I worship him.
Yeah.
I would wish to be half as 1/4 as successful as this guy as a writer. Now, here's the other thing. My publisher, Morgan James, runs my books in manuscript form through an artificial intelligence application called Authors AI, authors.ai. And it's their system is called Marlowe. So Marlowe reviews my manuscripts and then critiques them, and in a very technical way. Like, do you know that you used the word "was" 850 times, which could indicate that you're writing in the passive. Go to hell.
Right.
Give me a break. But what is absolutely a mind blower is with they do a comparison of your books to other books, to bestseller books, and which books are you most like. Without Remorse by Tom Clancy is the number one.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Fantastic.
I told you that would blow your mind. It was
Yeah.
just unbelievable.
So there's a
And
subconscious connection, I think, then. Like, so it's coming
I
through.
don't know.
And I only met
I
you once via screen and, read your book and then interviewed you. And all of a sudden it was like this, maybe it's this unconscious connection. I love it. Yeah, I love it.
so that's happened before with Morgan James. The previous books that they've published of mine, when they do this study, this test, Tom Clancy is right there. Your book is very much like Tom Clancy's. Now, not only did Without Remorse was number one, but number two is Patriot Games by Tom Clancy.
That's one of his best. Yeah, that's.
And so, yeah, I'm not going to fight that.
Yeah, yeah.
If I did it in the eyes of artificial intelligence, I'm good with that. But so funny. Now, the other thing is the things that they are comparing you on are things like the subject. What is the subject all about? So that's part of it. Number two is the style, your writing style, and your unique way of communicating. And every writer has a unique, distinctive style. Agency, number three is agency, the way that your characters act and behave is a measure of their agency. Mood is roughly translates into the feeling or emotional experience that you are trying to evoke in your readers. And number five, tone. Tone in fiction refers to the way in which you express your attitude and establish the overall flavor of your story through your writing. So, I mean, based on those criteria, I love that there's an AI program that can read my book and respond. Now, the sad part, they do this in about 5 minutes. I want them to struggle, man. Come back to me in a week. But it just blows my mind. My mind.
I love that. And I think it speaks to this kind of, I always call it the energy or vibes, and I know those aren't the best, like kind of the most descriptive terms, but there is, the unconscious this is the best part about books and writing and art in general, I think, is that there is this kind of connection, like even unsaid. Like I had no idea that, that the company was feeding your manuscripts in there, or two, that it would come out with, maybe I had some idea of Clancy. We talked about it a little bit, and that kind of sparked something in me to when we had you back on to maybe do Clancy. But then I was like, to have the exact book that it gave you, I was like, oh.
It blows my mind. It blows my mind. Because that's why I asked you earlier, I said, did I say something? How did you pick this book? Do you know something I don't know?
Yeah, it was a different method, but it's interesting that there's something that, and this is a little bit unrelated, but it's not, because like I said, I train AI for my day job here, and it's just a team of us, and we do these prompts and stuff. And one of the ones that I can't say what it's for, what it is, or the companies or anything. We all have to sign NDAs for, it's top secret. They don't want anybody knowing this stuff. But we were doing these question prompts, and we had to explain the logic as to how we came up with these questions, and then the computer kind of had to recreate it. And then we had to kind of judge that and be like, okay, how did the computer come up with, the AI model come up with this question? And it was interesting because they kept, the engineers wanted us to put our logic for the question in a certain way. It was almost very robotic, like it wasn't, great writing or anything. It was just like robotic. But then it occurred to me at some point, it was almost fictionalized, because for me to talk about how I rationalized, for example, picking this book and like the connections that I had with your work, like, I don't even think I could do that, right? Like there's no logical reason or reasoning, like any rational thought that went through my head when picking this. It was just kind of all these weird little connections from meeting you and interviewing you and then talking and reading your books, and this little lightning strikes that I couldn't even explain, right? And so how do we get the robot, the AI, the software to understand that? And it can't, right? So it was getting confused, and it was just kind of very interesting to me to see that, where I'm like, oh, maybe we're thinking about it the wrong way, whereas we keep trying to get it to think like a human. but like it can't because it's not, you know, like, and it's, we don't think necessarily A to B to C all the time like a computer does. We have these little lightning bolts that'll just, well, we're going to A, and then all of a sudden we'll jump to D and then back to B, you know, because we have this kind of bouncing around electricity in our, I don't know. It's just interesting how that works, you know, with these models and where we're going with the tech and all of that. It's just very interesting.
It's crazy. It's so much fun to be part of that. And, you know, it's analytical. It's not thinking. It's
right.
Analyzing. You know, it's categorizing. It's looking at all these different measures. It's mathematically impossible that they would have come up with the same book.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, it's just like crazy.
Yeah.
But so anyway, getting back to the content of the book, I didn't like Clark in this, and I really didn't like him. I mean, I may have liked him in the 70s when I read this, but I don't like him today. And he absolutely was responsible for the murder of his girlfriend.
Right.
It goes down, you know, she's a prostitute, for God's sake, a drug dealer, and he goes waltzing down the you know, to check out the drug dealers. I mean, God, how stupid could he be? And then, of course, the government, the Pentagon, recruits him to go over and free up the prisoners of war, and you know, and he goes in there and blows that. You know,
yeah.
he could have done something different. You know, luckily they you know, Clancy figured out a way to bail himself out.
Oh yeah, he's great at that.
Got lucky, but yeah. So it was so funny how my opinion of Clark changed in reading this. I loved the guy, and then hated him in this book.
That's interesting too, and we're fascinated by that on this podcast too. You know, like kind of, you know, how you read something as a young man or young woman, you know, when you first come to it, and then with some age, some maturity, life experience, you come back to it 10, 20, 30, 40 years later, and all of a sudden it's like, I don't remember this at all. You know, this isn't how I remember it at all. And then you're kind of almost viewing this character that, because I think you're right, it's set up so that Clark is this ultimate badass. He is this ultimate, like, you know, literally without remorse, like no feeling, just cold, calculated, you know, SEAL trained guy, even more so than like Jack Ryan, like the Clancy's big claim to fame character. You know, like he's considered, I would say, almost like a darker version of that.
Oh, I agree totally.
And like, I know Clark appears in a few Jack Ryan novels before this. I know, yep. Like, and the big one, if you've seen the movie, listen, I think it is it Patriot Games, where in the movie version, at least with Harrison Ford, where they have Willem Dafoe plays John Clark, and he's like this like operative, you know, put in on the Vietnam Islands or something, and like he's like, oh, call this guy, he's a special ops contractor, former SEAL, and he's going to help you out, and he helps him out, you know, like, and that's Clark's role until Clancy started writing the John Clark novels, where he's the main character now. We have this kind of origin story with Without Remorse. But I agree with you at almost everything you've said so far, James, in terms of it's probably one of the clunkier Clancy books I've read. In terms of the style, it's interestingly enough, I wonder what you think of this. The first 100 pages, 150 pages or so, like I read like lightning, just one sitting through the first 150 pages. It was moving so fast, and then the pace started to clunk up a little. We'd like take these turns, and like there'd be like these long explanations of military rank and stuff, and like and then all of a sudden you get to a fast-paced action scene again, and you're like, oh, okay. So yeah, I wonder. And I mean, at this point in his career for Clancy, you know, he was well established. He was Tom Clancy. Everybody knew the name. They knew the Jack Ryan characters. They knew, so he had a reputation. I wonder, from a writing perspective, do you think Clancy was trying to get away from maybe the Jack Ryan character to do this? Or
yeah, I think he was struggling to find a character that was right, that could be a badass, that could be, that keep things exciting and rolling along, and move, bringing them in at the point where you need some excitement and energy. What's really funny is transitioning from a reader to a writer it provides a different perspective.
Yeah.
You can tell when the writer changes gears or is getting stuck or has painted himself into a corner. You can see it, and writers don't stop and then say, okay, let me fix that. Go back 40 pages. They're just going to plow through and try to make it work. And you can see the struggle. You can absolutely see the struggle. I saw it so clearly in this book. And it was interesting for me to see it for the first time as a Clancy enthusiast.
Right.
It was interesting to say, hey, my hero Clancy really got stuck here, and I'm feeling good, as right. Not that my writing is anywhere near the level that Tom Clancy's is, but for the first time I could fight back and say, you know what, Tom, you kind of blew it here,
right.
And you might have tried this approach, or you might have tried something else. And one of the things that these big I don't know how many pages, this 700 pages.
yeah.
You need 40,000 words for your work to be considered a novel. And I write novellas.
Right.
And I end my books when I want to end them, not when I want to add another 10,000 words to make it a novel. And I feel proud of that. I feel really good about that. And you don't need those extra 500 pages of copy. If it's not adding anything.
Right.
And so I'm pretty pleased with the direction I'm going, but plus they're faster to write.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you about that too. The kind of the way as a writer, and you can see it even in your heroes. Kind of once you start doing that, practicing that craft, like you said, do you find yourself, especially as prolific as you are, like you're so prolific? I mean, you're up there with Clancy in terms of writing these stories. Clancy was the guy who was putting out a book or two a year, like the big kind of pop writers always do, and kind of very successfully. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when it's almost like being practiced in the art, like you're practiced in the art, so you can see the techniques, you can see the directions. You're like, okay, you set this up, and I can see what you're doing, and you could go, 100 different directions off of this setup. Why did you choose to go this one? Maybe he was, maybe done with the Jack Ryan. By this point, he had gotten so much money. It had been, big movies, Harrison Ford starring as this character you created, all that kind of stuff. And just maybe, because I remember even like authors like Stephen King has talked about this. We're like, yeah, all the success, you have everything you thought you ever wanted, but then, artistically, creatively, you feel stuck and you're trying to maybe blow something up, maybe deface something, but trying to change directions, trying to be like, I would never let Jack Ryan do something like this, but I can invent this guy who can do something like this, I don't know. It's interesting. I wanted to ask you about recurring characters too, in terms of, using them in terms of fiction, series, all of that. Because series are big right now. At least if you go through the big 5 publishers, they want series, right? Because that's what sells. That's what gets book deals, movie deals. Using recurring characters, and this is something we talk about. We have a James Bond series, like a running series, where we read all the James Bond's books with a friend of mine on this, who's a big James Bond fan on the podcast, and we watch the movie and talk about it just like this. And I was thinking about that too, with like Fleming, kind of these, when you have these recurring characters, what do you think about that as a writer or just as a reader? Do you think that's easier, harder, more difficult? Does it limit you in terms of, you can't kill off this character because it's a series, or you can't get him hurt too bad because, or I don't know. I mean, what do you think of recurring characters in series like kind of Jack Ryan or John Clark or?
Well, first of all, having recurring characters makes it easier for the author because you don't have to build the character,
Right.
and the character has a backstory. The character has relationships that you can. Immediately you have a much greater capability to pull in assets as you need them. Was very interesting in Zephyr's War. In Zephyr's War, there was a character in here who his name was McGregor, and I killed him off in the story, and then sent it out to my readers. So I have, like 20 people who promise they'll read them and give me feedback. And they panicked. They said, why are you killing this character off? And, I don't have that many fans that I can, afford to say, yeah, because I wanted to,
Right.
I backed off and killed off a lesser known, a lesser developed character so that I could keep him, and so I did in the future. I love characters, and I had Small Fortunes was kind of like my memoir of my wife and I working together, and the characters that I build up in here I have in Zephyr's War. And I am bringing them back again on another book that I've done.
Right.
So I love it, and
Right.
it makes it much easier to weave a story, and you can remind people. So this is the character, and this is the character's background, but you don't have to create it from scratch. And I'm all in favor of that. Now sometimes it's difficult as a reader if you're getting a book where the character is already developed and you're missing something.
Right.
As a reader you have missed a core concept, a core background to this character that is eventually you're going to want to read that book, but then it's just very hard. So I try to do it in such a way that the full background is there.
Right.
I'll touch on it very quickly, but it's important to let the reader know who the character is and the essential ingredients that make them up.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the technique, right? Like that's the skill, the kind of craft behind how much are you going to rely on this character's backstory being in a previous book, putting it in the current book, like kind of, there's a balance to that. You don't want to put all of it because you've already written it in the previous book, but you got to put enough that like a reader who maybe didn't read that book can still kind of keep up with it and understand, some. But yeah, that's interesting. Are you a James Ellroy fan at all? And his crime novels?
No.
Black Dahlia is probably his most famous, and then L.A. Confidential. All these kind of his L.A. Quartet is the big one. But every book he's ever written, big crime. He writes these doorstop crime novels, and they're all based in like the 40s, 50s kind of L.A. for the most part, and there are these thousands of characters, in these things, and that the series has these reoccurring, not the main detectives or whatever that he's copying, but like the mayors, the DAs, the people running these departments that these detectives have to interact with, and he kind of does it in that way. It for listeners out there, I just bring it up because it made me think of it. You saying it for listeners out there, there's a master at doing that, where he's very good at giving you a little bit of a recurring character that you don't feel like you're missing out, but you can still read the whole thing, and yeah, so that's very interesting.
I got an email, fan mail the other day, which I don't get that much fan mail, so
it feels great, doesn't it? Yeah.
When I get one, I read it. So I started reading this, and it said, had I ever considered developing Tasha Zephyr into a bigger character and in her own story? And that was from Zephyr's War. She was the daughter of the big protagonist in that book. Well, within hours, I had written 3 chapters on Tasha Zephyr as a main character. I mean, So I can say my adoring fans demanded
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
that I write this story. Anyway, that I'm well into a new one with her.
That's it.
And
Hey.
you know what's fun is if it doesn't develop, I put it aside.
Right.
You know, I don't agonize that. Oh my God, it's not working. I'll write until I'm exhausted, and then put it aside and check it a day or two later. And if it holds together, that's when I really start building out a full outline. Yeah, that's another thing. Is so many of these courses on writing talk about the proper way to write a novel is to create an outline. I can't
Right.
do it that way.
Yeah.
I don't do it that way. I write 2 or 3 chapters, and then the thing will start to expose itself to me. It'll start to talk to me about how do we weave this story? Where is it going? What are the tension points? How's it going to end? I love the endings of my books. If I do say so myself, I mean, I love to surprise the reader, and not in a bad way, in a way that resolves the issues. I like the reader to be, to really get satisfaction out of the ending, but I like them to be surprised, and so that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's interesting you saying that. Like, I'm a big Stephen King fan, and kind of he's talked about this in many interviews. And I was thinking this goes into the Clancy thing when he wrote the book Misery, and everybody knows it's a great book, great movie with Kathy Bates and all that about. What is that? Oh, the main character is a writer who writes this series with, this character, and his fans have these expectations, but he's kind of done with it. And apparently that one, he didn't sell the movie rights right away. He was like holding on to them, even though people were asking him for it. And eventually he did, of course, and we got the movie. But like, if he said the reason he was holding on to it is he said he wrote that book because he was just so angry at like, they wanted, he became like almost a formula, right? Like they're like, oh, we want the Stephen King formula, or we want the Tom Clancy formula, give us that Jack Ryan formula, give us that stuff that we know we want out of it. And I think as a creative, you do feel a little suffocated by that, and then so maybe somebody like Clancy coming in here and is like, you know what, I'm not going to write another Ryan Clark or Jack Ryan book. I'm going to write this new kind of series of stuff, just because I can't stomach doing it right now, or whatever it is, or I just want to break that mold, or I just want to be like, I just don't want to do another one. I've done 50 of them already, and all these people breathing down your neck to write it.
Clancy was so creative that he developed stories, that like nonfiction books,
right.
So here's an aircraft carrier, how it works. Here's a submarine. Here's an armored personnel carrier. That's fantastic to be able to completely switch gears and write factual types of books. It's just amazing.
I know he was even asked during some of these defense conferences post 9/11, where we're like the war on terrorism was starting. If the listeners that can remember back that far, they would have him come for because he was so knowledgeable about military and stuff like that. I guess they would have him come to these conferences for creative juices, where he would help try to create terrorist scenarios for what would be the most devastating type of scenarios, for a terrorist attack on U.S. soil. And they would have him and a couple other, I think, crime writers where they were just like, what is the craziest thing you can think of in terms of military operations? Like, how would we deal with this? And it is kind of crazy to see, you think it sounds funny when you first say it. Oh, you're asking a fiction writer, to come in and do this military conference about terrorist protocols or how we're going to do this war or whatever. But then when you think about it, it's like, yeah, he is creative. He can do all these things. He has a vast knowledge of the procedures and stuff. And, not that they're going to, it's just a scenario they're trying to practice and see what could happen. They're not trying to, you can't plan for everything, as John Clark would we see in the novel, failing, his plan's not working out. That's a huge part of it. So, but yeah, I just think it's so fascinating. How many fiction writers are asked to do that? Like to go consult the U.S. military, the NSA on that's only Clancy would be able to do something like that.
Yeah,
That's
I
incredible.
totally buy into that. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it sounds insane. It sounds really ridiculous when you think about it. But then it's like, yeah, I don't know. But getting to the themes too, and I think these tie into your latest book and really a lot of fiction and kind of sci-fi fiction particularly. The idea of seduction, the theme of seduction, temptation. And as I said, like that first couple 150 pages, they use kind of this young, attractive girl, kind of sexual seduction. And that's always something I think for male characters as well. I mentioned James Bond already. That's something that always comes up on the James Bond episodes because that's his big weakness, right? Is women, beautiful women. He's a great spy, but then he gets involved, seduced by a woman, and then all of a sudden he's making mistakes or he has to change his plans because he wants to save the woman. There's like that aspect of it. I just think kind of the theme of temptation, seduction, the kind of always ask kind of, I don't know. I mean, what do you think of these kind of scenes in terms of kind of tantalizing the main character here, the sex scene, and then kind of, they're in love right away. Like they're right away, very quickly, like in this thing, and it sets up the whole story. But I was thinking that in terms of AI too, right? Like kind of being seduced. And I think it happens in your book, kind of seduced by maybe, I don't want to say easiness, but like the kind of, I don't even say shortcut, but just kind of, you're seduced by this technology. You're seduced by this beautiful woman. You're kind of tempted into using it and then maybe giving it a little bit more control. Like you already mentioned, like Clark kind of bringing her back to where she came from for like the drugs on the streets in Baltimore City. And it was just like, yeah, why are you doing that? Like, like to protect this girl, you wouldn't do that. Are you not thinking clearly because you're seduced by this woman, or are you not thinking clearly because you're outsourcing it to this AI software, this, killer app, the new app that you bought? Or, yeah, what are your thoughts on the theme of temptation in this and then your own book, that's your latest book and all of that?
Well, temptation comes naturally for it's very interesting. My wife will make comments when she's reading my stuff and say, "Is this you? Did you write this?" It's very, very sexual, and she, yeah, and just get past that. Well, one of the things, the Zephyr's War was literally a war and business tension in that book. And yes, the primary character is starting out to grab your attention. I can't tell you how many times that happened to me, where I'd be walking down the street and be attracted by a set of legs, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, I'm going to be late for my meeting.
yeah.
But and Killer App was the give and take between the protagonist and the computer, the app, and they become almost human-like back and forth and flirting with each other and all of that. Then you have the third person, the cousin, in New York, and it was a natural thing for them to have this kind of dialogue. And so that seduction thing is something that does keep coming up in my stories. And as I said, I don't do an outline. I'm going with the flow, and that happens fairly early in the book too. And it's a theme that continues throughout their lives as over time. But this is a lot of fun. This I try to make the books interesting and fun.
Right.
And there's nothing more fun than seduction.
Yeah. I think it's a masculine thing too, at least the sexual side of seduction, right? Because it is kind of this, the famous character. We already said James Bond, Jack Ryan, John Clark, these kind of big iconic characters. There is kind of this seduction that is always looming in the background. And we talked a little bit about subplots and stuff, and I want to get to subplots too. That can be great use for writing technique and subplot and stuff like that outside of the main story. Like that really is, it's something that you just can't escape. Like it is this kind of constant temptation everywhere with that. But
and it's not in your face in my work. It's really not overwhelming. It's subtle and in good taste, I think. My wife is the arbiter of that. I mean, she would just simply say, "Doesn't work." Doesn't work, and it's not going to work the third time you bring it back here to me.
But you talked about historical fiction too. I wanted because the backdrop to this and one of the subplots to this novel, listeners, if you haven't read it, it's the Vietnam War is this kind of subplot to basically the backdrop to this entire story, really, and it's interesting. I wanted to get your take on this, like kind of what your thoughts are, because it seems like it's anti-war. Like you said, it's almost walking this line in terms of like it's against the war, but also Clark is a loyal, well-trained soldier that knows how to fight in wars. And I don't know. I mean, because I was just thinking of it's like it kept being brought up, and obviously because the storyline with Clark being the SEAL on a rescue mission in Vietnam previously, we keep flashing back to the first time, and then there's this second POW rescue mission that Clark is brought in to consult on, where they're trying to bring 20 POWs out of Vietnam, the Viet Cong POW camps or whatever. But I was just thinking that's interesting, and I wanted to ask you in terms of like kind of writing historical fiction or using a big historical event as a backdrop, even if you're not mingling it. And we think of I'm thinking of all the World War I, World War II novels, all these kind of the modernists were all writing novels about the wars that they were in and stuff. So there's that. But I think also in terms of like just kind of using that in historical events in fiction, is it more difficult, or do they ground the story in something? Or, why did you choose to do it for your upcoming book, not even the one that you're currently promoting here? So that's going to be the third episode with James, listeners, when Ghost Town comes out. But yeah, just your thoughts on Clancy's use of something like that, like the big historic event like the Vietnam War, or how you use it as a technique and all that. And for me, like my generation, Vietnam War, I just hear stories. I wasn't alive. Like it was even the Cold War. Well, the Cold War literally was ending the year I was born. So it was, it's just stories that I hear. Like it almost feels like it's like something you read in a book. But then there's all these people that were actually over there, and then I don't know. I mean, how do you use like kind of historical events? How do you feel, and how do you feel about Clancy using them? How he does it, all of that.
Well, when I grew up, I was born in 1949. So there were surplus equipment, helmets, guns, backpacks were all Army. The U.S. Army had U.S. on them. Sometimes they'd come back with a dent in the helmet, but they were. The World War II was just bigger than life, even in the 1950s when I was a kid. And every day we would play Army, and we'd go out and dig ditches and hide in them, throw mud balls at each other, and that sort of thing. It's natural that there would be historical based novels, and there are lots and lots of them out there, and tons on World War II. The Civil War is another thing. I love Shelby's books on the Civil War. Next to Clancy, I liked Shelby the most. I could just read. I could read all his volumes and start over and read them again. That sort of thing. Vietnam was different. It was not a popular war, and the reason was, I think, that they did a lousy job of selling it, and I don't think our country has recovered since then. I think that we have had a complex about that war since that time. I grew up I was the youngest of five, and my brothers all served in the Navy. They were officers. They all served. Two of them served in Vietnam, and they all got back fine. But I didn't. I was not a draft dodger, but I was not a I was not an enthusiast, let's say, and so I respect the military. I respect the history and the what they went through, and in this new book of Ghost Town, I talk about this. It happens in the 1800s. It takes place in the 1800s. I talk about the soldiers, the veterans marching down the main street, and which my grandfather or great grandfather was a captain in the Civil War, and was wounded at the Battle of Newmarket in Virginia, and was left on the field for dead. They thought he was dead, and when they got him. The next day, they were on a burying detail, the Confederates were, and they realized this guy's still alive. So they dragged him over to somebody's house, and this person took care of him until they brought him back to life, and then put him in a prison.
Right.
Pretty rough stuff. So I'm using these historical references. And I think that's very important. I don't know. I think the respect for history is something that is not done a lot. There are references to history, but not kind of a respect for history. And so I'm trying to work that into my books. Not all that consciously. I think it's just a natural thing for me. I do it because I believe in it. I trust what has happened before, and it's important for people to respect that. I kind of got derailed here from your question.
Podcasting, that's all it is. Yeah. It's one derailment after another when we're just kind of talking. Yeah, but I think from craft-wise too, it does give you that. Okay, here's the backdrop, right? So you're restrained, but restrained in a good creative way, where if you want to do like a ghost story or a supernatural story, put it in the backdrop of a war that happened, that was real, where there are facts that you have to contend with, grounds you to something to make it feel more real. Even though it's a fictional story about a ghost or like a supernatural, whatever it is, you're then grounded in this history that helps you branch off into these creative directions, I think. So I think there's that craft level, but I think you're right. Like there's also this cultural kind of level of World War II is the one. It looms so large in our conscious. And I think even watching movies growing up, even today still, where the Nazis are the villains and stuff, the Nazi party of the 40s and 30s in Germany are the villains. And it's like almost everybody alive, like that party didn't really exist for almost everybody alive right now, but it just looms so large culturally. And I think Vietnam is another one. People talk about Korean War as the forgotten war because it was between those two, right? And it kind of is, because these two big cultural, historical moments are just loom so large. I don't know. I mean, there's one, it's attractive, right? You can use that like we already said, craft wise. Here's a list of, a world you can put yourself into or your characters into, and then it grounds everything. So it's a jumping off point. But I think it also kind of, adds interest, piques people's interest because you're, like how big are World War II fictionalized, historical fiction kind of books. They're everywhere because they're so fascinating. Two, because it's such a huge cultural thing in our society, culture-wide. Everybody knows about it. Everybody knows what happened, what it is, who the villains and heroes were and stuff. And then Vietnam is just in that, maybe because it went on so long, or like you said, it was terribly marketed. It was the first generation to really reject the draft system, really say, no, hell no, we won't go. Burning draft cards, dodging drafts. It was the first kind of rejection of a major war. And like you said, I think it's interesting to view it in that zoomed out lens in terms of how have we really recovered from this. kind of hastily getting into a war that maybe most people didn't think was as justified as, say, a World War II or a World War I, you know, like just kind of not as justified in terms of that. And then people started to rebel, and it's kind of remembered as this rebellious moment, you know, the hippies at Berkeley campus protesting. And again, all this I just know from reading books because I wasn't alive, you know, it's just what's been ingrained into me through going to school and grad school and all of that, and being taught these things. But yeah, I'm fascinated. I mean, I like historical fiction. I think it's great. Like, and it's a huge, you know, I'm obsessed with the myth making angle of fiction and kind of how important that is, and kind of how you think of your country, how you think of even the founding fathers. I always use as an example because everybody knows them. You know, that story that we tell ourselves about it is mostly a fiction, sure, like, but it's so important that we have that fiction, you know, like kind of to bond us through this, to not paint over it, I'm not saying that, but just to kind of give us a collective enthusiasm about, you know, our nation or whatever. Like there's things like that, but I don't know. I mean, again, I know I'm the one going off all these questions here, like kind of losing the path on the podcast. But yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated by that concept. These huge cultural concepts being brought into fiction, and somebody like Clancy using them in his novel to give something to this character. Like just saying Vietnam War gives a huge backstory. Even if he left it a mystery, like didn't explain it as much as he does in Without Remorse, you know, there's like a mysterious air. Clark did something in Vietnam that is top secret, and he's not allowed to tell anybody about, even his wife, who dies tragically in those first like 20 pages. Like, yeah. You know, it kind of, he's using this really great creative tool of like taking this big cultural icon and giving a little bit of mysterious air to the character development almost. And then of course the plot itself. But yeah, again, I'm going off the rails here, but I love that idea. And like you said, your next one, because again, James is so prolific out there, listeners, be ready for the next one. It's going to be 2 in 1 year, James. That's two in 1 year. That's
coming as long as I feel, you know, the whole thing that I'm working on is I write when I enjoy writing, and I continue to write while I enjoy it. But if I stop enjoying it, that's it. I'm done.
Right.
Yeah, I misspoke about something I wanted to mention.
Please,
Shelby Foote is
right.
the author of those Civil War books. What's interesting about Shelby Foote is he has a southern perspective on the Civil War, and everything is factual, but it's all, you know, it's from that southern perspective. A really, really good Civil War series of books.
Oh, yeah. And that's the basis for the Ken Burns documentary as well, listeners. If you're intimidated by the thousands of pages that Foote wrote on the Civil War, he also is like one of the main people in the Ken Burns Civil War documentary on PBS.
Oh,
that
he's wonderful.
He was a fiction writer.
Yeah.
And then they were like, oh, you do something on the Civil War. It took him, and then like 10, 15 years later, he came out with this 3-volume, like 10,000 page complete history from the very beginning to the very end of this war. And it's written like a narrative, a fictional kind of, it's enthralling. Yeah, it's really wonderful. That's such a good book. I loved the guy. I'm so sorry he passed away, but I was such a fan. He's got that big Mississippi accent, right? And in the documentary, he always has a pipe in his hand. Like he's smoking a pipe.
You know, nothing's going to bother him.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have one other project happening that I'd love to tell you about.
Please, yeah.
Talk about changing genres. This is.
Oh, let's go. Yeah.
When my grandkids come over to visit me, they always bring their computers or their little iPads and that sort of thing, and they'll say hello and, you know, tolerate dinner with us, and then all of a sudden, boom, they're gone, and they've got the iPads open and they're playing their games. And, you know, I'll watch them play for a little while, and I'll say, hey, you know, let's do something. Oh, well, you know, we're kind of busy right now. And it drives me nuts. So my next project is to let them know how much fun it is to play games outside. And so I'm working on a new book called Games We Played as Children, and how to get your kids and your grandkids off the computer and outside for fun. This is a big project. This is a whole massive project, in fact. And the way I'm doing it is to get people, when I talk to people about this project, they get very excited. And they say, "Whoa, we used to do this, and we played this game, and kick the can, and Olympics, and all kinds of games." And I said, just write down a paragraph. Just write it a little bit and send it to me. Well, I've been compiling this for about a year. And I've got hundreds of little snippets of stories of the games we played as children. So that's part one of this book. Part two is how to play the games we played as children. And so that's a whole the tougher project is to put rules around it so you can go outside and enjoy it. Just play the game. How do you play hopscotch? Well, here it is. Here's how to do it. And so that's my current project. That's going to probably take all this year and into next year to get it done. And I'm looking for a sponsor for that, or somebody who, it's not like a traditional publisher. I'm looking for some organization like Kiwanis, for example. Their theme is to help children of the world. Well, you could help them by getting them off the computers and outside for fun. It's not like I'm against computers. They're wonderful machines, but kids should interact more with outside and moving around.
Absolutely, yeah. And I had my first kid 6 months ago, so and my wife and I are very concerned with screens and screen time. And are you familiar with Jonathan Haidt at all, the social psychologist at NYU?
No.
He's recently put out a book, and this has been one of his beat. He has little kids, right? He has like an 8-year-old and 10-year-old, I think. So his big thing is he's been obsessed with the phones in schools, and he's been trying to start an organization to eliminate, phone-free schools, essentially. That's what he's trying to push, where he says, especially social media apps, where he said you can see the hockey stick on a chart, where it says, especially young girls, the suicide rates, and, 13-year-old girls, just a hockey stick. As soon as Instagram was invented, 2007, and then around 2012, it just shoots up, like ridiculous amounts of shoot up. This kind of what the tech is doing to us. And I think this is your latest book, Killer App, too. What does the tech do to us, And I think that you said this project you're working on now, I don't know, he's just somebody, I think if you're interested in that, he's done a lot of, he's a social psychologist, so he's trying to, validate the theories. He's trying to create evidence and studies that can prove that this is bad for us, that the kids are spending too much time on the tech, they're spending too much time on social media and these kind of applications, and it's causing them great distress, and developmental distress, as well as, mental health issues, anxiety, body dysmorphic stuff, because, they're bombarded with these beautiful filtered, models on Instagram, and then they have terrible self-worth because they see this all the time. It is kind of how that affects our psyche. And you see this with children too. I mean, I see it in some of my younger kind of nieces and nephews and stuff. You said you see it in your grandchildren, like the kids that are raised with this tech it's a whole nother animal. It is unlike anything we've ever seen before. The apathy, the kind of dead-eyed look they give you when they're not on this dopamine software, this addiction software that's being fed to them all the time. Yeah. There was that recent report on that, I have a little daughter now, 6-month-old, so I'm looking at all these baby programs and stuff and baby books, and there's that one Coco Melon. It has been going viral for a couple of weeks because it's this, it's algorithmically designed to addict your kid to it, essentially, like to make them not look away from the screen, as they're watching this little show or little animated, baby show. And it's kind of, what are we doing? What are the ethical implications of something like that? What are not just the psychological damage, but just kind of the developmental, like, are they ever going to be able to create a game like, something as simple as Cops and Robbers, like Cowboys and Indians? We would play that all the time growing up, whatever you want to call it. It's all some variation of the same game there, but it's that was so pivotal, even to me as like an elder millennial. My generation was kind of the last generation to grow up without this tech. And you see it in my generation for the people that are on the bottom half of my generation that kind of grew up with the tech. For me, it was like I was like in middle school when it was like switching over to where tech was coming a big thing. So I was already, a teenager by the time this was happening. And then, of course, we are where we are now with the tech being everything. But that's very fascinating in terms of, how do we get kids to have a childhood, to fall out of a tree, to climb a tree and then break an arm or something, like kind of safetyism, all this stuff. Like, how do we get kids to do this stuff that they just used to do on their own? We didn't have to push them to do this. It's so insane. I mean, if you look into some of these numbers, it's crazy.
What is his name?
Jonathan is the first name. The last name is Haidt. I believe it's Haidt. And he's at NYU, social psychologist. And I think he has like a Substack page and all that where he's been writing about this a lot the last couple of years. But I think he recently put together an organization that's trying to get parents, organized in a lot of school districts to be like, hey, we need to ban phones in school. And that's interesting, too, because when I was in high school, cell phones were becoming ubiquitous. Everybody had and these were flip phones. This is before the iPhone was invented, and it was not allowed. Like, you could not have them. If it went off, if you didn't have it on vibrate, even if you had it on vibrate and somebody heard it, the phone was being taken from you. You were given detention, this kind of, and now it's like, people are going out of their way. The schools are going out of their way to ensure these kids have these phones in their pockets that are more addictive than they ever were when I was in high school, like with just the flip phones. We
used to pass notes.
Right. Yeah. We would do that. Yeah. Before,
and that was bad. You'd get in trouble for that.
Right. And now you imagine people just watching YouTube instead of, paying attention in class or something. And then you can't do anything about it as a teacher. It's like, well, that's not going to lead to a good outcome. So what are we going to do? Like, either give teachers the authority to take the phones away or just ban them at school. That's the easiest approach. But that's a whole other conversation. Yeah, I know I'm going on about this, James, but that's very fascinating where we are with the tech. And I think that book you're working on is needed. It's needed right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is. And the stories that I'm getting are so fascinating, and it's not about being older. It's about using your imagination. There is one story that was sent in to me by someone who lived on a farm in Africa. Her father was part of the U.S. government, and she had no friends, zero friends anywhere.
Right.
And she had no toys either. She had, a couple of toys in her house, but she wasn't allowed to take those outside. So she would go out and make a circus out of the leaves and use her imagination to build things and have interactions with each other with all the different things she created. Fascinating stuff. Your imagination work it's so exciting. I've got wonderful stories in here that are really eye-opening, and it needs a critical purpose. And maybe this Jonathan Haidt would be somebody I should talk to about, how can we use this?
Yeah. And he's been great about it. Yeah, that, and I it's just so. Imagination. I'm glad you said that, because as creatives, that's what we're doing. We're imagining these fictional things. We're writing it down as it comes into our head, and then editing it, perfecting it, making it as good as we can. But it's also, that's such an important part of childhood in terms of imagining, even just doing basic things. You know, people talk about, you know, visualize your success, all that. Of course, you read a self-help book and stuff, but there is some truth to that. If you can visualize yourself as like a monster or whatever playing a game, well, then you can probably visualize yourself as, you know, being a successful CEO of a company or something that you started, you know, starting your own company. You have to kind of, you're using imagination in a different way as an adult. But if you never develop that as a child, you know, playing these games where you pretend you're a monster or a robber or a cop or whatever, then you're going to have a less fulfilling life when you get up there into the adulthood where you use imagination in a different way. And obviously, if you're not a creative, but yeah, please.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think that this is a very telling issue because imagination is not going to go away. I mean, it's important for AI. It's important for writing. It's important for math, everything you say and do, because the root aspect, the root energy level is your imagination. What does your imagination spark? What does it? How do you get going in a direction? How do you? Everything we've been talking about was sparked by imagination. Interesting stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love it. I love having conversations with you, James, because we always get on this stuff. Yeah. And I wanted to ask you about subplots, and we mentioned it already a little bit. There's a lot of subplots in this novel, and then you talked about using it in your own work and stuff like that. You know, how do you use subplots in terms of craft, fiction writing in general, as a reader or writer? You know, what is it about subplots that we crave or we want, or how do you use them in your craft? You know, all of that. How do you approach it?
Oh my goodness, what a big question.
I know. Yeah.
Well, I find that subplots kind of develop naturally. You know, it's my style of writing, as I said before, is it's linear. It starts in the beginning and it happens, and like life, it's never really linear. Something happens, it'll get you off track, or we certainly experimented with that today. And so you pursue that off track thing and see where it goes, and it might be something that you say, you know, it's not working really well, I'm going to back off that, or you know, I'll just mention it and then back off, or hey, let's really develop that because that's a whole different world that's going to perk along here. And I love subplots. I love subplots if they're resolved by the end of the end of the publication, end of the book. So I try to pull them all together. That's can be tough because sometimes one doesn't relate at all to the other. In Killer App, I have a bonus story in there called Artifacts. I don't know whether you saw that, Artifacts, and it's about artifacts, archaeology, and and there's a subplot in there that is like a knock your socks off kind of subplot because the guy's sick, but he's imagining all these things like they're real, and like running into Captain John Smith at Jamestown and that sort of thing.
Right.
I love that little book. I love that little novella, and it was really fun to write. In this, so that we have the subplot of being not well, but you hardly know that is happening until the very end, like the last 2 or 3 sentences. Do you realize, oh my God, there's that subplot has been revealed. There it is. I love the subject. Both my wife and I are archaeologists. We studied archaeology for fun and became certified. We're not completely certified archaeologists. We are on the path to becoming certified archaeologists. The problem is our knees won't take it. You know, we can't stick with it because we're getting too old to do it. But the process of discovery is is the other subplot in this one. It's a fascinating experience, because when you're, as an archaeologist, when you uncover something, it can be the littlest thing, and suddenly you think about that from the person's perspective who lost it. Somebody lost that beautiful little necklace or brooch or something like that, or coin, and you connect with that person at that moment in time. And so that's the other subplot in that story.
Yeah,
I love subplots. I mean, that's to me, that's what makes it juicy. That's what makes the story interesting. As long as it doesn't get too far afield, and you can weave it back into the main theme.
right. Yeah. Would you say that? I mean, Clancy. I mean, there's so many subplots in this. What do you think of Clancy using them in this one and Without Remorse? Like, are there too many? Are they successfully woven back? What do you think, James? Yeah.
I think there are too many.
Yeah.
I think there are too many. I think he's got 3 books here.
Right. Yeah.
And
800
some of
pages.
Some of the subplots were not fun. They were not interesting. They were not. I didn't want to read them. I read them because I felt like I was on having an
suffered for the podcast.
So I was going to read it whether I liked it or not. But this was a real awakening, because this was the first time I ever felt that I was not happy with Clancy's work. First time.
Yeah.
You've ruined me on this.
Yeah. No, I like that though. I like that because they can't all be masterpieces. Like especially somebody like Clancy who put out so much work. Like, and you can see the really good ones, but they can't all be masterpieces. Yeah. Like, so I think it's good when you, especially you said coming and revisiting it. Like I did this recently. Well, not even recently, like a year or two ago with Kurt Vonnegut, where it was so pivotal to me. It was so pivotal to me as a kid. Teenager, reading this, discovering this type of fiction, and then reading it in my 30s, I went back to it, and it didn't hit me quite the same way. It almost seemed almost too cynical. Like, and I was almost just kind of, and I would never have thought of that or realized that. I would always just keep going back to the memory of me reading it as a 19-year-old, and being like, oh my God, this is the best thing I've ever read in my life.
Yeah, you're not going to ruin that one for me. I'm not going to read it.
I was saying, yeah, I try to avoid that too. There's some things I'm like, oh, I like that too much to do a podcast. I don't want to go too deep. But yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 100% on that. I think that's exactly what this is. Especially when you think about the love interests in this, like, are kind of a subplot, and there's so many. We start off with his wife, then we have Pam, the kind of drug addict prostitute, then we have, Sandy that comes in at the end there, who he eventually marries, and there's just. Yeah, there's 3 love interests in this. That's a lot. That's a lot, even as fiction writers. Yeah.
And Sandy, that's a very interesting subplot, because I think she's nuts.
That's interesting. Yeah. What do you mean?
I think she's absolutely insane for fooling around with him. She knew what he was all about,
right?
And she still stuck with him. And why? Yeah. She had a life. She had things going on that she didn't need this guy. Man, this guy was trouble. And, she blithely, I'm going to stick with him. Man, I think that was a flaw. And I would have been better if she had walked away. Sorry, buddy. You're a loser.
Gave him more of a challenge, especially when he's dropping off this strange drug addict girl,
Take care of this one. Oh, she got killed. Sorry, don't feel guilty. We couldn't do anything about it.
Yeah. That's one thing. How dark this one is. This is a lot of tragedy, lots of death. Every character has this tragic death kind of spouse. I mean, and I know people, if you don't have a spouse, you can imagine it, sure, but it is hard to imagine sometimes, like when you have somebody like that and then losing them, like that's such a tragic thing. It's a life-ending thing, really. Like if that would have happened to you, and then you have like almost every character in this book having that happen to them.
Everyone, line them up. We're gonna kill them all. Even the bad guys who were good, you know, the prostitute's crying for the guy he killed, you know,
Right.
But he was nice to me. Oh my God. You know, he didn't back off. He didn't without remorse. It's I've always hated that title. It's perfect. Perfect title.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The last things I want to touch on with theme before we finish up with the kind of the revenge, which we mentioned already, kind of the main revenge focus of this, but even that becomes almost like a subplot at a certain point. The revenge on the drug dealers and stuff like that. And also kind of the desperation, like that dark theme of everybody's significant other kind of passing away, either the cancer, tragic car accident, any of these little things. I don't know. There's like a desperation to the John Clark character, and even a lot of the other characters in this book too. There's also that revenge plot. And I think they kind of go hand in hand in terms of when you get desperate for something, you start doing things, you know, and that's great for craft story-wise, right? As a writer, if you get a desperate character, well, then they're going to start doing crazy, lashing out things, and you can run with that creatively. But then, you know, like you said, at this point, it can almost be overblown. I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts on the revenge kind of theme and also kind of the desperate for revenge, maybe I should say, in kind of this Without Remorse, or your work more broadly, or fiction more broadly, you know, any way you want to approach it?
Well, the thought that jumps into my mind is not so much the revenge, but killing main characters. And my Ghost Town book that's coming out in 2025 is really takes out a lot of key characters because it was the randomness of the Johnstown flood. A dam breaks.
Right.
2,000 people were killed in town, and they, you know, the day before they all had relationships, and they were all, you know, doing different things. One's planning for the Memorial Day parade. Another one's worried about the veteran soldiers. Is it going to be too wet for them to march? Another one was getting the bar ready for serving everybody, you know, who's big drinking day, and they're killed. They're just like gone, you know, just wiped out in minutes, and they have like seconds to reflect before the flood the wave hits them, and so the characters that I've built up throughout the whole book are taken out in an instant, and I wanted that impact to be really hard. I wanted it to be felt, and usually I try to let people down easy on any death scenes, but here it was as harsh as the actual event. I think. You know?
Yeah.
I wasn't there, but and so writing in that style, writing that way, really makes you aware of what are, you know, the consequences of this. Why should one person die and another not? And what if one dies an instant death and another person dies a slow death, is, you know, harmed, you know, how all the different ways of dying are in this one book. And it's not a happy scene, but it's one of where they pull together and help each other and get through this time. And another subplot in this is the bad guy ends up being okay. You know, he's still a bad guy in a lot of ways. You're still angry with him for the things that he did, but he's forgiven. You know, it's like you forgive him for all of his quirks and all of that, even though he's basically responsible for killing 2,000 people. If you're going to kill people, you might as well kill a lot of them.
Yeah, right. That's I mean, it's a great setup for a story, honestly, like a dam breaking or something like that's out of the control of everybody involved, right? Great premise for fiction. I think of like that book, The Leftovers, which became that TV series where the whole thing is just that, you know, 3% of the world's population just disappears, you know, like in an instant, just 3% are just disappear, and everybody's trying to figure out why that is. That's the whole book, is like, what was this? Was this a rapture? Was this alien abduction? Like, what was this? Like, how did people just disappear? 3% of the world's population just disappear all of a sudden, that's obviously, that's used in a Marvel movie, listeners out there, Infinity Wars. It's a great little plot. It's great used in that too. It's just these things that are out of everyone's control, just so ripe for fictional work. You can just take it and run with it. And then when you have historical happenings like yours, like a big tragedy like that, just so rich. Great premise for story writing. And
by the way, my brother wrote the classic book about the Johnstown flood. It's called The Boss's Club, and it's also historical fiction, but it is really the big picture of Johnstown and in its role in the Industrial Revolution, and then how the flood affected it. Mine's a little, more of a pure fiction. His is a lot of history, and his name is Richard Gregory. Really highly recommend that book if anybody's been interested in listening to us about Johnstown and all of that.
Absolutely, we'll link it below.
Absolutely, they're a companion piece.
Yeah. It's two brothers too. I say that there's going to be some lightning connections there in the head that we don't even. Some reader's going to write in. They're going to be like, "Hey, do you and your brother?" They're going to start all these connections between it. Yeah, that's fantastic. The last thing here before we get to the final verdict, what do we make of John Clark? What are your thoughts on John Clark? Like, we talked about it a little bit already, but just kind of John Clark as a character, how he's written, his actions. One of the details that stood out to me is he has 147 IQ. Supposedly that's his test average on IQ. So the guy's a genius. The guy is literally a genius. What do you make of John Clark? What are our thoughts on that?
Well, as I kind of said throughout this discussion, I was disappointed. He may be smart, but he doesn't have a lot of common sense. So from my younger days when I first read it, I loved this guy. I love this. Yeah. He's marched to a different tune. He was rugged. Nothing would stop him. He would figure out a way to kill you no matter what, and now I just like, I'm not as excited about him, and so he went from an A to a B, It's not, I can't put him down to a C, but if I read another one, I probably would.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because with that, this is the era of, or at least it was until very recently, the anti-hero, the Walter White in Breaking Bad, the kind of the guy who you're rooting for, even though he's doing bad things, maybe he's not moral. It's interesting, and this is well before, that era of television with anti-heroes that we lived through. This is, Clancy was well before that, but I'm interested in how we approach it. Like there is, everyone says there's no rule, and there's truth to that. There's no rules to writing. You can do whatever you want. That's what's fun about it, sure. But then there's this thing: if you want people to have sympathize with this character, even if they're this ruthless, heartless, without remorse style military guy, you have to give them a little bit of stuff too. You have to give them a little bit of sympathy with that character too. You have to kind of write the character in a way that they show you morality in a different way, or something like, I don't know, like a tender scene with a child or something. I don't know, like just a random example I'm pulling out. Yeah. And then you can have them go on this killing rampage or whatever, and people are more okay with it.
Well, the interesting things, here he has a relationship with his top surgeon
at Hopkins, yeah.
And his wife, who's a professor, and they're hanging out with this bum who they know is killing people, and their job is to save people. It didn't connect, I mean, when I was younger, I might have said, yeah, so what, it's right. Like they were, they got the bad guys, and there were good guys that were taken out here too, not real good guys, but oh God, am I becoming a liberal?
said usually it goes the opposite way, right? Yeah, as you age, you get more. No, but I know what you mean, though. I know what you mean. It's almost so much without remorse. It's almost so little remorse that it almost gets unbearable. You know, like it's almost unbearable at a certain point. You have to kind of break that a little bit. I mean, you could do whatever you want, obviously, listeners, if you're writing a book. But like, if you break it a little bit, you get a little bit more sympathy from readers like me and James. But yeah, I think you're right about that. It is. And I guess maybe he was trying to, or let's give him the benefit of the doubt. He was trying to show us the transformation of this guy from Kelly, the kind of retired Navy SEAL who had this life with his wife and an unborn child. And then he does this turn into the John Clark, which is this code name they give him to be this kind of CIA, you know, military intelligence asset that they put all over the world eventually as you read the, you know, other books in the series. But it's just, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, if he's trying to capture that, okay, I get that. So he's going from one thing where he was concerned with his wife, and then he lost all that made him become this heartless, kind of unremorseful guy, making the mistakes. I don't know. I mean, that's interesting. Yeah, I always say just that 147 IQ stood out to me, where it's just mentioned so casually that this guy has like an Einstein level IQ that I was just, oh, all right, yeah. And he's getting himself shot up, but still. Yeah, fantastic. Final thing here, James. What's our verdict on the novel? What do we think? I know we've been talking about it already, but final verdicts. What do we think of the book? And I know there's a movie now, too. I did watch it when it came out, and I rewatched it reading this. They kind of change it to the point where it's not quite the same thing at all. You know, they kind of change the plot in the movie a little too much for me personally, but, you know, I'm not a purist or anything. But I don't know. Yeah, what are your final thoughts on Without Remorse, your final verdict? Or
I think, you know, I think it was worth my time to read it. So you know, as much as I've bashed it, I'm bashing it from a critic's point of view,
right,
and a writer's point of view, not from a reader's point of view. From a reader's point of view, it had me. It kept me interested. There were times when it slowed down. There were times when I questioned it. But I think, as from a reader's point of view, it passes. It's a good read. From a critic's point of view, I would love to see some things changed, but he's not around.
Right. Yeah.
And nor would he listen to me.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same way about it. Yeah, there were parts of it that were hard to get through for me, the clunking it up, but then there were parts that were just and I mean, of course, it's Clancy. Of course, he knows what he's doing. Of course, he knows how to give you a kind of spy thriller style book. So he does that. You know, you'll get that in it. But if you're used to some of the Jack Ryan stuff, it is a little different. Yeah, it's not quite the same, and maybe we dare to say not even as good as some of those. But yeah, I'm glad we read it, and I'm glad I got this came out of the ether of our shared subconscious here, James, in our brief meetings together. Yeah,
that's the crazy part, isn't it? I mean, really, the fact that it popped up in this AI study that, you know, my work, and you know, how did that happen? I thought for sure you somehow knew that. Wow.
It's my 147 IQ, you know. That's
that's what you can do with it.
Right. Yeah. James, this has been so fantastic. Again, please come back. You said you got that another one in October. Please, our door is always open. We love having you on. Drop your handles, drop your website. Of course, that's always going to be linked below, but just let people know where to find you, where to find your books, your social medias, anything you want to plug.
Sure. The website is jamesrgregory-books.com, and my email address is jim@jamesrgregory-books.com. The R is necessary in there. It's James R. Gregory, and the hyphen is necessary too. Not a dash, it's a hyphen. Yeah. But I found that when I repeat that, people get it to me. They figure out how to do it.
Absolutely. And that's all linked below as well, listeners. You just have to go down there and click the link. You'll see James's website. You'll see his books. You'll see all the other books we've discussed here today as well. So, again, James, this has been fantastic. Please come back.
A lot of fun, Andrew, as always. Thank you.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
I may say male is entirely hostile. No! Inner
Resources.
life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. Are you radioactive now?
Inner.
Resources, American resources.
Being bored?
Some activities are intentional, right?
It shows such a lack
Heavy.
of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I
Heavy.
should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.